Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this month's ISSA meeting. I have a few things that I want to cover before we start our presentation. We have a new treasurer. It's Jason Parker. Jason is taking Jonathan White's place for the remainder of the year. He has volunteered. He's a CSU Nexus student, and he's volunteered to help us out for the treasuring position. Marissa has moved into the secretary and position, and she's also covering the communication director position. So if there's anyone else interested in that position, that would be great. Just let me know or send me an email. And our Nexus students, I did get approval for you all to join for $30 for the annual membership fee for ISSA, our local chapter, and international chapters. So if you're interested, just let me know as well on that. I think that was all we needed to cover. So now on to this month's speaker. Colin and I have been working on projects at CSU for several years now, and so I'd like to present to you Colin Cassidy. Thanks, Colin, for presenting this month.
Yeah, thanks, Loretta. I appreciate everybody having me, and glad to address the group. Let me go ahead and share my screen so I can get this queued up. All right, so you're seeing the first slide there?
Yeah, yes,
Excellent. Okay, yeah, so overall, my presentation has a couple goals. Number one is bringing some attention to threat actor playbooks, which is a public resource from our FortiGuard team. And number two is providing some details into the MITRE ATT&CK framework and industry trends with regards to MITRE ATT&CK. So quickly, FortiGuard is the threat research arm of Fortinet. They're our team that does our original malware research, our zero-day discoveries. We have like over 600 zero days discovered by FortiGuard and counting. So they also provide our global threat intelligence and preventative measures across all our security appliances and drive public and private partnerships with, for example, Department of Homeland Security, CISSA. We're a founding member of the Cyber Threat Alliance as well. So about me, it's been about 20 years or so, been working in system engineering in networking and security. Actually, well, over 20, you start getting a little high up there. It's like I just stopped counting, 20 is good enough. And it's pretty amazing because I'm only, 29 years old. So that works out. I've been at Fortinet about 6 years, and I'm currently a principal system engineer covering SLED accounts, that's state, local, and education vertical here in Georgia. And for the last, year or so, I've been, basically working behind the desk, talking to people about Fortinet cybersecurity from my office and doing these Zoom meetings. But I do get out, occasionally, and one of the times we did, I have photo evidence of this here. We went down to Columbus and we took a spin on the Chattahoochee and did some whitewater rafting. Got ourselves in a nice Columbus State University raft there. So that was a lot of fun. I don't know if anybody else has done this, but it was a blast. We had a great time. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. And so let's talk about the agenda. All right, so we wanted to kind of set up the motivation of using these threat actor playbooks and the MITRE ATT&CK by talking about, like air quote, the problem. So we'll get into that a little bit, describe that. We'll talk about the MITRE ATT&CK framework itself and trends within organizations using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to actually measure your defenses and how they stack up against the attacker techniques. We'll introduce, of course, the threat actor playbooks, what they are, how to take advantage of them. And we're going to finish up with some industry trends with respect to MITRE ATT&CK and how it's being incorporated into various security products. All right, so let's frame up the problem, right? So, someone told me at one point that for perfect security, all you had to do, is remove all the users, right? But, the users aren't really the problem. It all really starts with the malware and the threat actors behind it. And what we're really trying to get at is, first the challenge of aligning your defenses to protect or detect against the threats. And then how do you, describe the underlying approach that the threat actors are using? And there's various security frameworks for this. Let's just start with one that's pretty common. You might be familiar with this, called the kill chain. So cyber attack kill chain is a good place to start. There's various phases of a cyber attack. And so this kind of lays out the chronology of a cyber attack, from a reconnaissance phase, where they're scoping out assets, potential ways in, what's their approach, what are things of value, and all the way through weaponizing delivery of that weapon, finding a vulnerable system and launching an exploit to install some sort of malware or a program which can then establish a command and control back to the attackers. And then they've got to pursue from there with various techniques in terms of lateral movement, privilege escalation, other discoveries, and so on, to get some sort of action on their objectives. And so the opportunity here is that within the kill chain, at any one point during the chain, if you break that attack or disrupt the attacker in that phase of the kill chain, you can break or disrupt the entire attack. So that's the kind of framework, the opportunity. For the attackers, the basic approach is, get in the network, don't get caught, and go steal some stuff, right? But overall, this is a great tool for looking at that, trying to disrupt that, and how to do it within an architecture framework that maps against these phases. And you can look at your defense in depth kind of architecture to do exactly that. And this is an example of that. So across the top, you have the kill chain phases and sequence. Down the side, there are kind of a list of security tools and features commonly found in products like, for example, like a next generation firewall. You've got intrusion prevention, antivirus, and so on. And, you could basically map these out. For example, intrusion prevention, you could disrupt exploitation of vulnerable systems by protecting against CVEs. You've got antivirus protection on the network, where you can protect against malicious files. That would also apply to the delivery and installation phases. Anti-botnet looks for outbound attempts at communication back to command and control networks, so you can scan for those. And so on down the line. These types of features broadly protect within these stages. But what this doesn't address is what the actual attacker is doing. And if you could be protected against that particular technique, right? So let's just quickly go back to the problem by way of an example. And so for those of you, maybe know, maybe don't know, alternate data streams is, like, I'll use air quotes here, another time, a feature in the NTFS file system. And so what this means is it means there's metadata that's associated with the file and the file structure. So, what could go wrong with this, right? But taking a closer look, a FortiGuard researcher discovered that by using this metadata, malware authors were actually hiding files inside other files, right? So this was a technique for hiding the malware inside the metadata. And anytime the file was executed, it was called from its hidden location inside these alternate data streams. So if you wanted to make this piece of threat intelligence, now that we know about it, actionable, what would you ask for? So, at the easiest level of actionable in threat intel, you might ask for or rely on IP addresses, file hashes, domain names, things like that. Because we're a security vendor, we'd also might be asked for a signature of some sort, IPS, AV, that sort of thing, some kind of network or host context or specific tools, being used by the threat actors. And finally, we could try to communicate what we know about the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Otherwise, you might hear that about called TTP. So tactics, techniques, and procedures used by the threat actors. But it's not that easy. And anyone kind of familiar with this sort of stack here is really looking at something called the pyramid of pain, right? So this is kind of stating that the higher up you go in trying to get this sort of threat intelligence, the more difficult it is. So, we most likely have kind of a limited understanding of what the attacker is actually doing to complete their mission. But just knowing, you know, what some of the tactics and techniques are in general are very useful. And we can get to that in a minute. But even if we know some of these TTPs, another question is, how do you measure, track, and document this over time? And what kind of language, you know, do we use to go forward with this process? So that's really like the hard problem that MITRE ATT&CK can be used to tackle. So let's just talk real quick about who MITRE is. All right, MITRE is a not-for-profit organization. They manage, control federally funded research and development centers. You may already know them or be familiar with some of their work because they manage the Common Vulnerability and Exposures Database, that CVE database, you know, that you can get access to on cve.mitre.org. The MITRE ATT&CK framework is one of their projects that's publicly available. It's curated by them and been developed over the years, and it's also free. So it's kind of self-described as a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. And ATT&CK stands for Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge. And the framework is a matrix of different cyber attacks, techniques, all sorted by different tactics. And I couldn't resist. So, you know, get ready for the matrix. We're going to be looking at a lot of matrices coming up here. So get ready. Welcome to the matrix. And here it is. Here's the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. So this is the framework. We can talk about this in more detail. The top level categories up here are called tactics. And think of these as goals. You know, and you remember back to the kill chain we talked about, these kind of align with the kill chain, but they're much more detailed. And if you look at the different, you know, topics here, there's a lot more about what the attacker does once they're inside the network. You know, so they're trying, they've already executed, you know, here they're trying to establish some sort of persistence. They've got, you know, defense evasion, credential access discovery, and so on. So these are a lot more of the techniques that they do. They execute, you know, once they're actually inside the network. So it's got a lot of value as far as that goes. Under each of these items in the top row are the tactics and the techniques that are used to achieve that tactic. So if you think of this top row as kind of the what, these techniques below are the how. And they're actually how they're going to achieve that goal. So you can look at a technique, for example, in more detail. And here's one for the execution tactic. And the technique here is running a command and scripting interpreter. You know, this is involving common OS tools. You can expand this on their website and see it's got tools like PowerShell, Windows Command Shell, Unix Shell, Apple Script, and so on. But drilling into something like this within the framework brings you a lot more information, you know, so you can read about PowerShell and the fact, you know, it's a common administrative tool, as we all know, but how are the adversaries using it and abusing it for their purposes, right? So they goes through some description of how they're using it in a malicious manner. And then, you know, who is using it. So you've got some documented examples of adversarial groups that have used this and used it in various procedures, and that's all described here within the framework. You can go further down and there's information on mitigation, detection, various references. I mean, it's a great way to educate people to the techniques and emphasize a standard language, you know, for communication. So, you know, we got a wealth of knowledge in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. How do we operationalize this? How do we take advantage of this information? And, you know, back to the question, how do we measure defenses against these tactics, techniques, and procedures? All right, so let's just think about this. Let's pretend you're working in the SOC. You know, you've got the executive walks in or Loretta walks in, you know, asks you the question, right? What are you monitoring for, right? And, you know, the answer is of course, malicious activity, right? We're looking for malicious activity, Loretta. That's what we're looking for. But ask again, you know, what are you really looking for? All right, you know, so you've got the dashboards up in the big screens, you know, the lights are down, logs are coming in. And, you know, the concern a little bit is that we've hit some kind of autopilot mode, you know, where there's a false sense of security, you know, maybe alert fatigue, right? This is what we're trying to avoid. So a mature, security operations center is going to have use cases and scenarios that are actively being monitored. All right, so correlating events and data needs to be done, and a key tool and component of that is a SIM. Right, so for example, FortiSIM, which is our product, has built-in correlations and rules that identify those attacker use cases. Right, so being able to detect these security incidents and map them back into the actual attacker use cases is kind of the start of what we look at as an iterative process, for continuous improvement. So going over that process kind of at a high level, you're going to have this iterative process, and you want to follow the cycle with the goal of identifying and closing gaps. Right. So number one, you're going to go through the tech framework, prioritize, examine the techniques, how they could be executed. You've got also ways to test these, and these should be tested in the environment. There's a lot of different open source tools, commercial tools as well. You've got things like Metasploit from Kali Linux, Atomic Red Team from Red Canary. We have a product called FortiTester from Fortinet. You've also got the next phase after you've done the simulation, where you wanted to see your ability to monitor, right? And, do you have detection and prevention technology specifically to identify those particular techniques that you're testing for? Right. And then, there's an evaluation where you've got to identify the gaps. I mean, nothing's perfect. So this is the process of continuous improvement. So you want to identify the gaps, and possibly those gaps may be based on a technology, a tool that you don't have. There could be a configuration where, things aren't configured properly, or it could be configured otherwise, or some sort of licensing, that you may need to take advantage of, or it could be a million things, but there's an evaluation where you want to do that. And then really the whole idea is, document, review, improve, and rinse and repeat, so you can continue getting the benefit of this sort of process. So, we brought up the need for documentation and process improvement, and there's also another tool that's really useful in the MITRE ATT&CK framework on their website, which is called MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, right? Because we asked earlier, how are we able to measure, track, and document this over time? So there's this tool by which you can kind of create layers and some markings across the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And, there's color coding and various things you can do. So as you go through this process, you could color code and try to track, your coverage level, gaps, and so on. And there's also, folks have taken this information and done some blogging on how to take this and put it in Excel, right, to use the power of Excel against this sort of tool set. There's different things that could be used there as well. But the MITRE ATT&CK website does have this navigator tool, which is really useful. So as your organization goes through this and starts to understand how the techniques can be detected and defended, kind of wanted to highlight another resource that FortiGuard has developed and made available, which are the threat actor playbooks. And these go along with all the other resources FortiGuard provides that are accessible on FortiGuard.com. So the key question, right? So one of the key questions that playbooks help answer are we protected, right? So that's the question you want to answer, right? Are we protected, and how are we protected? So moving back to the threat actor playbooks, they're designed to kind of help you answer that question in more detail, because really the answer isn't always just going to be a simple yes or no. There's going to be a lot of different pieces to it. So there's more information that's provided here. We worked in conjunction with other members of the Cyber Threat Alliance to put these together. There's also other playbooks that are out there. You can find that other members of the Cyber Threat Alliance have put together and maintained that are useful in addition, to these we did. And on FortiGuard.com, you're going to see several examples of threat actor playbooks from different campaigns, that we've followed over the years. And there's a kind of a collection of tools. So there's the threat actor playbook viewer, but there's a lot of information behind this and additional resources that you can access that go along with this entire package. So the latest one we had done includes the malware campaign for MITRE ATT&CK, but we've got other ones, Goblin Panda, there's Silence Group we tracked, Zghost, and these are really deep analysis. They take into account multiple campaigns over many years, and there's pretty deep dive into them. So there's not a ton of these, but there's a lot of information behind each one. And I think going forward, our focus is to deliver more of these at a higher level. And in conjunction with the playbooks, there's other resources I mentioned that were provided. So there's usually a connection to a blog article on our website. There's also what's called TLR, that's a threat landscape report. And that's usually either a quarterly or relatively regular updates from FortiGuard on the general threat landscape that they're seeing across all the threat intel they're collecting. There's also a playbook viewer, which I've shown, and I'll show up just in a minute. And then there's also files that are posted on GitHub that handle all the different IOCs and structure of the playbook. And there's also usually other things like presentation slides, live report videos, and so on, quick explainers to go along with the playbook resource. So for example, here's the threat actor playbook for Zghost. There were almost 1,500 indicators, 28 different attack patterns. And the malware that we observed here wasn't doing anything particularly destructive, but the purpose seemed to be more at data collection. And this aligns with the framework, right? So you've got tactic categories are shown, and then you've got techniques down below. And so you could look at this, for example, persistence, right? So there was an underlying technique into this campaign to create like a new service set. And that new service set was going to be set to auto run on the system. And then that would be providing them persistence and actual survive an actual reboot, because that service set that was new would continue to auto execute. But you can click over these and it'll provide the actual IOC used in the techniques. And the overall, the structure of the JSON sticks file is on GitHub. And there's a little more detail here on the view of how those techniques support the tactics in the playbook. And what I want to show you here is that you can kind of, by detailing these sort of techniques, you can start to answer the question, which we asked before, which is, are we protected? Because you can look at the different mappings of these different techniques, and you can look at your defenses against these actions, right? So there's an effort here at Fortinet to provide an overlay of our technologies that we have against these specific MITRE techniques. And here's an example, of the controls you could potentially apply. There's no real one answer here. There's multiple controls could be used. You could have most likely have multiple vendors in your network and various solutions, but just want to show you an example, of a way to kind of overlay coverage against these particular techniques. And our goal at Fortinet is to help answer that question of what specific techniques are addressable and what we can do to help detect and protect against them. So with that said, there's been a trend or movement with vendors to provide these mappings against the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the specific techniques. And customers are becoming more educated about this framework. They're asking us, how does your technology actually deal with these TTPs? So this isn't, so much a single report or a white paper, really. It's more of an integration into the product itself, which is much more useful. So to give you some examples, one place we started out was FortiSandbox. And, the sandbox executes the files, runs the tracer logs, does the detection, and, where we can, we map various things that we find back to the MITRE framework, right? So you can see that here is the framework, the matrix again here at the bottom, and it's basically showing you the different phases and what it's found and how they map against particular techniques. So that's great, right? Because at this point, now we're starting to all speak the same language, right? And this is going to help you in specific analysis of this particular threat, and then how it applies back to the work that you're doing on your process. Another example is our FortiEDR product, which has specific protections against ransomware and data exfiltration, right? So once a rule's triggered, so this kind of tells the story. You can see the device here, the process that was running, what destination the file write was trying to go to, timing and so on, but you can also see the triggered rules. And over here where it's circled here on the right, there's a trigger rule on process hollowing, and it gives you a description of that. And it'll also, of course, talk about what are the MITRE techniques that map to that exact issue on where the trigger and the rule hit. Right, so you can get a lot more information about about this and see what software was using that particular technique. We talked about SIM before, and here's an example from FortiSIM where the MITRE framework is used to visualize threats against specific devices within these different attack stages. So there's different views here, but across the top, I have highlighted the MITRE tactics again, right? And then clicking on the bubbles, could filter the incidents that are down below. And then in this box here, we have circled or outlined the techniques that go along with the particular tactics and the events that triggered, and what the categorization is across both tactic and technique. And these are the active alerts that are coming in, and you can see the mappings of how that impact on your own network is happening against the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that's a key component, in getting this type of visibility. And just another view here in FortiSIM, wanted to show you here where the MITRE framework is being presented, and historical incidents are mapped directly into this matrix, right? So you can see the tactics that are being used and the techniques themselves. And you can click deeper into the technique. So for example, this one here, exfiltration over alternative protocol is shown. You could look at that closer, drill into the actual detail of the event and see, that was triggered, for example, by a large outbound transfer of data to a foreign country. And on the testing front, there's a few examples of testing resources I wanted to share. So testing was another component. So you've got prevention, detection, but also the testing angle. And I found also here, you've got some resources of try to answer the question, where do you start, right? You've got a lot of coverage, a lot of things to look at. And Red Canary put together a threat detection report here. It's on their website, and you could look at this and drill into it, because they looked at the prevalence of these different techniques across the environments that they observed and studied in their 2021 threat detection report. Right, so you can look here and see, okay, well, what were the most prevalent techniques that were seen, and that's a great way to start, because you can prioritize these and then actually drill into them. And you can look at things like from here, a test suite. As you look into this, you've got the technique mapped, and you can see, okay, there's a test suite called Atomic Red Team that can be used. You can drill into those techniques and use that tool set again and run test cases against those particular techniques. So that's another example. And we have one as well. We've got a product called FortiTester, and we do there's a platform we have for doing performance and security testing, and we recently added a MITRE ATT&CK capability where you can define an adversary. You can customize their capabilities in terms of the tactics and techniques that are going to be used in the test case, and then run a test scenario to determine the effectiveness of the environment you're testing against that particular technique. So, this is one approach. Like I mentioned before, there are others out there, but really the key point is that, no matter what the platform is, incorporating the MITRE ATT&CK allows that common language to be used for evaluating and testing your defenses. And I also wanted to finish up with a slide on our threat intelligence public information from FortiGuard. So there's a lot of resources that we have here. I've got identified. We look at billions and billions of files, hundreds of billions of files every year. We turn them into stories that we communicate with the threat landscape report. There's also weekly threat blogs, threat briefings, and so on. And I wanted to highlight some links that you could use. I can encourage you to read and sign up for some updates if you want continuous updates. And the landscape is always changing out there. So keeping up to date with trends and what's happening is really key. And that's kind of the point of the talk, right? I mean, so I wanted to make sure we can provide you something relevant, some resources you could use. And I guess with that, I'll conclude and want to thank you for your time and attention during the presentation, and certainly open to some questions. Loretta, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Colin. Are there any questions for Colin at this time? Yeah.
Okay, guess we
All
covered.
right. Yep. Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. That was very interesting. And I jotted down a few things that we'll probably be discussing. I'll bring up and we can cover that in the future. So
Yeah, if there's
thank
any
you.
correspondence or information regarding the resources that are provided, you know, I'll provide those to you, Loretta, and as well as a presentation, or you can email me directly. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Well, thank you everyone for attending this month's meeting. Our next meeting will be the third week in July at 5:30, and we will still be having the virtual presentation. So thank you all for attending. So, thanks, Colin. Bye.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks